Yeah, okay, let's get started of today's special lecture by Joseph Yoon, the AI data scientist at the Predictiv Care. Before I do that, I would like to do about 5 to 10 minute introduction so you can understand why I'm doing this special lecture. Um, Joseph will talk about the transformer. Transformer is part of the large language model. And before I want to do that, I want to clarify a couple of things. What are the large language models? BERT and other examples. Chat GPT, Palm 2, BART, all these are large language models. So GPT, like those kind of things. So it's actually trained deep learning model, and trained on what? Trained on language. So the output we can get from this large language model, LLMs, are information retrieval. Let's do the some experiment together. Yeah, here is the ChatGPT. Now let's do the some information retrieval. So instead of Googling, you can ask in the ChatGPT, what are the colors of the Italian flag? Do you know that? So let me ask the ChatGPT, the LLM, large language model, for information retrieval. So it is answering, yeah, Italian flag is made, consists of 3 colors: green, white, and red. So you can retrieve the information using the large language model that instead of Googling. And that's not the only thing. Let me show the sentiment analysis. Did you guys hear about the sentiment analysis? So let's say that what is the sentiment of the following sentence? Today I attended to a great music concert. What would be a sentiment of that? Let's ask it. Yeah, it's pretty positive, right? So you can analyze the or mood or sentiment of the sentence. And you can generate the poem, the text generation using the large language model. Write a poem on bioinformatics. So you can generate whatever the text that you are asking for, right? Yeah, let me just read the first few lines. Yeah, in bytes and base pairs, tales untold, a nexus where 2 disciplines hold. Bioinformatics, the key we mold to decipher lives of script, both new and old, something like that. Yeah, it can generate the text. Okay. It's not limited to that. We can generate the code. Generate a code to add from 1 to 100 in Python. Yeah, it generates the code. And finally, you can do the chatting. It's a chatbot, basically, right? So large language model are trained on the language, and it can do a lot of outputs in the different categories. And transformer happen to be the most successful and most powerful algorithm of doing this LLM. So there are multiple ways, but the transformer, since its invention in 2017, it has been very successful. So why the transformer worthy to learn for bioinformatics? That's the question that I ask myself. And that's the reason why I brought this into this class, graduate course class. Do you see this some similarity between bioinformatics, which is study the sequence mostly, and the language? For example, everybody probably here know that DNA sequence of ATG code for start of the start codon and methionine, right? So three element like A and T and G. When it's in that order, it means something. The start codon. What about the language? For example, I love chocolate. I is one token. Love is another token. Chocolate is another token. When this I love three tokens get together, it means something. I love chocolate, right? So when we study the sequence, can we use this technique, large language model, successful large language model technique, such as transformer, which is a core and very successful algorithm, right? And surprisingly, not surprisingly, 2017 is the when the transformer concept actually got published. And do you see a lot of these colors? Each one is the bioinformatics method here. Something like a red one is the DNA BERT, which is the DNA sequence related using this BERT or the large language model technique or the transformer techniques. So do you see that the many, even the concept was first came up in the 2017, do you see a lot of applications are already done? And if you look at the paper, you will see that each method actually improve at least 10 to 20% of the performance. So there is actually the advantage here. So for the sequence analysis, this is from this paper published probably this year. And there are multiple packages in the sequence analysis that use the transformer. So you learned in this class some traditional or classical tools, but new tools are actually made already. And it's not yet adapted, popular. That's why in this class, we are mostly I'm mostly teaching these classical and well-accepted tools. But I would like to expose you that this kind of new method is started to being used. And then many tools are already developed for for the sequence analysis, genome analysis, gene expression analysis, proteomics analysis, and the multiomics, combining DNA-seq, RNA-seq, ChIP-seq, and those kind of things together. And spatial transcriptomics, like a single cell level, the single cell RNA-seq with where it's located, the expression in the tissue. and biomedical informatics, and the drug discovery, like that. So did you see so many tools? The concept itself came up in 2017, but do you see there's so many tools? So many of them are already published and available. So that's why I thought this is very relevant. I'm going to share this slide anyway, so don't worry too much. So the point is, transformer is the core algorithm published in the 2017 in the field of natural language processing, LLM, large language model, but it's actively adapted to bioinformatics already, not just bioinformatics. And then you now saw so many tools already based on this transformer. So that's why I think it's very relevant to this class. And before we get started, I would like to briefly introduce some basic concept here. The query, key, and value. Have you ever uploaded a YouTube video? And you are required to write down some keywords. Those keywords are key. And then your YouTube video is the value. So for example, if I make some video related to the movie, and I put my keyword movie, and movie is my key, and my video is the value associated with that keyword or key. So if you go to the YouTube and then just type some keywords, for example, movie, you will see hundreds and thousands of values associated with that keyword or key. Key and value. Is it clear, the concept? What the key is and what the values are? Now, YouTube already populated or saved all these key and values. And a new user came to the YouTube and do the query. For example, show me a movie with a cooking scene. Then the query will be analyzed. Okay, the videos relevant to the movie and videos relevant to the cooking scene. And those are going to be output in the YouTube. So you start with a query, and query searches the keys relevant to your query. Then the values will be shown up. So is the concept clear? What is the query, the key and value? Okay. Right. So now let me invite the Mr. Joseph Yoon, who is the predictive AI data scientist, and he will do the guest lecture on the transformer, which is a core concept here. So, Joseph, can you share your screen? So a brief introduction. I actually already received a brief introduction. I'm an AI data scientist at Predictiv Care. And why don't we just jump in? So this is what the transformer architecture looks like from the paper released by Google. And it's quite a lot of shapes. So the base purpose of a transformer kind of
you can kind of denote it in this simple diagram, which is, well, first, I might want to mention that currently we're looking at a translation path. So, English to French. And fun fact, Google Translate actually does use a transform. So if anyone uses Google Translate, you've also interacted with the transformer. And the whole task here is to have an English input be encoded into something with numbers. And it's very abstract, but then you decode these numbers to get an output in French. So my job is going to be to explain how that process works. So here's a large language model pipeline, because obviously, if we give a large language model English, at least the transformer, if we give the transformer English, the transformer can't actually understand it. So we need to actually turn these words into some sort of number value that we can work with. And we do this in two steps. The first step is tokenization, and then the second step is embedding. And I think it'll be nice if we get a bit more context. So why don't we look at what tokenization is? So these days, the most popular method of tokenization is called subword tokenization. So at first it was character tokenization, which if you do a bit of deducing on the title, you can kind of deduce that, yeah, we split by every character. So I think in this sentence you would have 24 tokens. And that was too much computing. And you don't get much information. So what we did next was we did word tokenization. We split by every word. But then people decided that we want to actually gather a bit more information. And so somewhat what subword tokenization does is it splits the words into smaller parts. And so this is an example. And so what is the rule behind this? Well, this is a lot of words, but you split the sentences using linguistic rules. For example, prefixes, suffixes, and infixes. Right? So tall and an EST, you can split those. And what that kind of, the advantage of that is tallest is different from tall or taller. Right? So by splitting these words into smaller parts, we can actually gather more information from the same word, which is why we nowadays we do it in this way. And I just want to mention that this is also, we also have to program this to be done by neural networks. So there's that. And so next we have to embed these tokens. Right now it's still in words, and the computer cannot understand these words. So why don't we turn these words into vectors? And this might sound very hard, but why don't we just take a look at this? Does anyone want to take a guess? Where would you put the word apple?
So basically converts the words into different numbers.
Yes.
And then it's plotting it according to the numbers.
Right. And if you had to take a guess, where would you put apple? C. I mean, that would be correct, but yeah, so that's basically what the algorithm does, right? Word to vec, which is one of the popular algorithms to do this, it was developed by Google in 2013. And the whole point is to put words that have similar linguistic meanings close to each other. So just as you see here, we put apple at C. I actually find this example pretty funny because I didn't actually tell you the rule. You guys just like put it in yourselves, but that's cool. So regardless, you are correct. We kind of found a way to map words with similar linguistic meanings, which is like the dictionary definition close to each other, like in space. And how do we do this? Well, later I'll post up some readings that will kind of explain this more in depth, but because right now our focus isn't on embedding because it's on transformers. I'll just briefly fly through it, but we just assume that the words close to each other must be mean similar things. And so, yeah, that's under that assumption, you can train a neural network to basically be able to project these vectors into vector space and make sure that they're close to each other. And the next thing is cosine similarity. So this is going to be the last concept before we actually get into the real transformers. And this is basically the way we measure how close these vectors are. And anyone who's, I don't know, done calculus 3 might recognize this as a dot product. But you just move the magnitudes down. That's essentially what we're doing. So for anyone who is a bit confused, I also put a little explanation here. So we use this metric to measure semantic similarity. And if you imagine a cosine, if two vectors are overlapping and you take the dot product, what value do you get? Right. And if now the opposite case scenario is if the cosine angle is at a right angle, then obviously you get a value of 0. So basically, by dividing the magnitude over the dot product, we can actually make sure that we always get a value between 0 and 1. And so this is actually a common measurement that we use to help these models kind of train and kind of tune in their vectors to the place that it needs to be. And you can see that, assume that, we're trying to find out the cosine similarity score between vector strawberry and banana versus banana and car. You can see that if we do all the calculations, yes, the values are indeed closer. And so this is the main metric that we use to do embeddings. And yeah.
Why don't you specify similarity rather than other distance methods like Manhattan or Euclidean or J-cut index?
Right, that's a good question. Well, if you want the honest answer, I'd ask the Google people, but I'll try to craft an answer myself. So I believe they stuck with the dot product. One, because it's pretty easy for computation because the vectors we're working with are not actually 2-dimensional. They can be 217 dimensions. So yeah, it's very high dimensions. So basically for us, it's actually much easier to just compute the dot product, right? It's much less computationally heavy, which is why we chose to use the dot product rather than using other methods, which other methods might be good, but we just got lazy, I guess. Okay. Does anyone have any other questions before I move on to the actual transformers? Well, okay, so again, diagram, and here's some terminology that I might be using. This is basically the same diagram, but we split into smaller parts. So essentially, this box here is going to be referred to as the encoder. And then this green box there is going to be referred to as a decoder. And you might remember from the first simplified diagram, that's kind of what you saw, right? The encoder and decoder. And so why don't we just focus on the encoder for now? And this first multi-head attention, you see 3 arrows going into multi-head attention. And what are those arrows? Well, it's the vector Q can V that was mentioned earlier. And I like the YouTube example. I like to explain it actually this way, but definitely the YouTube example is probably a bit more easier to digest at first. But, basically in plain English, the query vector is in terms of our context, like our text, natural language processing context, we just say it's the current word that we're looking at. So the current token, right? After we split the sentence, we're looking at certain tokens. that would be the for vector in our natural language processing scenario. And the key vector would be actually the indexes of the value vector, or that's the fancy way of saying, okay, where are each of these tokens located in the context of this value vector, which the value vector is just the sentence itself. And as you can see, right, we take the scale dot product attention between those three vectors. And I actually think this is quite confusing because last time I checked, when you take a dot product between two vectors, you get a scalar. And then when you take a dot product between a scalar and a vector, I don't think that works out last time I checked. It could have changed, I don't know. But, right, so that's why they developed this method, and which is essentially you iteratively take the dot product between Q and K vectors, and then you take that vector with the value vector. So why don't we just go through that step by step? Essentially, we have an example sentence here, and we need three vectors, as I explained before. So basically, as I explained before, we split this into tokens, right? My name is blah, blah, blah. And let's just look at the first token. And I just put in some random values, but yeah, just assume that these are actual values. And so then we need another vector, which is the K vector. You get the K vector, and it's something called positional encoding. And here's another formula. But what it's simply doing is it's just telling us, okay, what's the order of these tokens, right? We don't want my to come last. Otherwise, the sentence name is Joseph, my would be a bit weird. So we need the key vector. And lastly, the value vector in this case is going to be the embedding vector of this entire sentence. And yeah. So the way we follow this process, I think I forgot to mention here. If you look here, the matmul, that's actually NumPy library. So in Python, there's a package called NumPy, and in NumPy, there's another operation, matmul, which basically just takes a dot product. Just so you know. So essentially, we're doing this first bottom like matmul, right, between Q and K. And essentially, now why don't we just take the dot product between the first token and the key vector? Well, right, we get this expression. And if once we take it, let's just call it, right, this. And now, as I said, there was a problem, right? You would be struggling to take a dot product between a scalar and a vector. But luckily, because we still haven't done all the tokens yet, we just iterate through the tokens. And each time, we have, token 1 and encoding, and token 2 and encoding, token 3 encoding, et cetera, and so forth. So this is the vector this is like the vector we would see at around this stage of the process, right, around the softmax. So next is softmax. So for anyone who doesn't know, essentially softmax just means, right, we just add all the components and it should be equal to 1. That's kind of, right, and so we take the softmax of this vector, which kind of acts as the weights, and then we take the dot product with the value vector. And just like before, we only get a scalar. And this is what we call an attention head. And then, as you can see from the name multi-head attention, yeah, we do this process multiple times, as indicated by this H here. So this would be one iteration of the encoder. And yeah, I just did a little foreshadowing. Yes, the encoder has multiple layers, which is why in the end, we're gonna get a matrix. So this is basically how we got what I call the matrix representation, as you saw from this first diagram. Right, and so does anyone have any questions on the first part? yeah, it's probably pretty confusing why we have to do so many operations. Okay, yes.
So you said that you can do encoding for every word, like can you
Yeah.
do that for sentences too, like split them into chunks and then give
Maybe like
then
add all
reference-
the vectors together and maybe get a final vector that points to, right? Is that kind of what you're thinking? Okay. Yeah, you are right. There is a sentence. It's not just for words. It does for sentences too.
Mhm.
So yeah, you're actually right. I think I forgot to mention that. So thank you. Yeah, that's how we got the value vector, by the way. The value vector is the sentence embedding. So we call that sentence embedding rather than word embedding. The people who name this stuff are pretty boring. But yeah. So anyways, let's continue. So the decoder is the next step. And so what the decoder does is it does the exact same thing. But as indicated by the masked multi-head attention like up here. Yeah, we use that mask thing that I skipped over last time. And this is like basically just imagine that you're just kind of covering up the order of the words, like the positional encoding. And the reason why we do this is because we don't want the model to cheat, right? If the model just knew the order of the words, it'll just print out the order of the words correctly. There's no point to that. So that's why we have masked multi-head attention as represented by the M head. And so that's what the decoder does. But yeah, so I want to just address multi-head attention real quick because I realize, you know, everyone might be kind of confused because I kind of rushed through a bunch of just random math stuff like letters, and yeah, it's pretty confusing. So does anyone want to just take a stab at what this diagram stands for, means? It isn't that complicated. Just like look at it and be like, what's the first thing that comes into my head when I see this? Other than the fact that, well, I see a triangle right here. Okay, that's pretty awkward silence, but oh well. So yeah, so if you just read this sentence, the law will never be perfect, but its application should. Why do you think there's a line between it's and law? Like, what's the relationship between those two words? Like, is there any relationship at all? If you think about it, it is referring to the word law, right? Like, if I just took out the first phrase, the second phrase wouldn't make sense. But its application should, like, I guess that could make sense, but you need to know what it is. And so that's why they drew a line between law and it to kind of represent that relationship, right? And then application is also represented because that's the action that this it is doing, which I don't know that part of speech, but yeah, there must be some random part of speech there. So now you might be thinking, okay, just to get this relationship, we have to go through all that math. Like we have to waste that much computational power just to get this. Like, and I guess I want to ask back, can you still do this without the Q, K, and V vectors? Because if you think about it, without the query vector, without the vector for each token, how would you know the meaning of each word? Like, just say you knew the meaning of the sentence, but if you didn't know the meaning of the things inside that sentence, then you can't actually formulate anything. And if we didn't have the key vector, like, I wouldn't even know where any of these tokens are located. Like, these words could be flipped, like, for all I know. And lastly, the value vector. Whenever, whatever sentence you speak, there's always some sort of connotation behind it. So we want to make sure that, sometimes the same word could mean different things because words have multiple meanings. So in order to capture something like that, you would need to know the whole context of the sentence itself. Which is why, if you think about it, it actually makes sense to have those three vectors. Otherwise, we can't compute any relationships like this. So that's my, right, so now why don't we just get back to the diagram? So for anyone who's looking, decoder was much longer than the encoder, and there's a reason. And it's through a process that we call cross-attention, which essentially attention, what this cross-attention does is we're basically doing the same multi-head attention, but on these matrices. And so the process is self-explanatory, really, right? You get the key and query vectors from the input matrix or the encoder produced matrix, whatever you want to call it. And if you do, if you follow the same process, blah, blah, blah. And I said it came to C head, but that just stands for cross head, as in cross attention, right? This process is called cross attention. So basically you're running multi-head attention, but on the two matrices that represent like that relationship from above. So, let's say we had one of this for English and one of this for French. Now you're just running it against each other to see what sort of relationships you can find in between. Because you already have so much information on each of the input and output. Now it's time for you to kind of cross compare. So, right, we take the softmax again, because that is part of the multi-head attention algorithm. And the output, we like to represent it through heat maps, probably because they're kind of easy to see. But the French version is on the side, English is on the top, and you can kind of see from the white sections where the model kind of highlighted a significant relationship. And you can kind of notice here that marine and the French version of marine, I'm not going to try to pronounce it, is, they indicate that there's some relationship here, despite the fact that the order is not the same. Because, French and English, they sometimes change around orders. So because we, understood so much about each sentence, we could actually compute complex relationships such as this and know, oh, this marine means the same thing as this other word. And despite the fact that their orders are different, we can still kind of predict which word means what. So that is what we did with cross attention. Now the last thing is, right, what do we do after? We ran through this algorithm once, but obviously the first time we run it, this algorithm will never be perfect because there's so many weights that we can adjust. So the last thing that I want to mention is a metric, and we call it perplexity. And this is actually, I like this name because it's kind of like what they do, and you can look at this GIF or GIF. There's I don't know, depends on how you want to pronounce it, but basically looking at the context, right, the red part, it predicts a blue word. And then you kind of compare it to the original input. And then the model looks at the word and it's like, wait, I'm perplexed. Why is this word there? Or they might be like, I'm not perplexed because this word matches what was given. That's kind of the English way to explain it. Obviously, I will link the more rigorous way in case anyone's interested, but yeah. So, right. That's basically the entirety of a transformer. Now, does anyone have any questions on this? I've always wondered what shape I should call it, but it doesn't really have one. I don't know. But yeah, transform, yeah. Oh yeah.
Actually, that is the meaning of the perplexity. Like, so usually we use PCA to kind of say the perplexity is kind of based on the distance between points. The closest points will be in the same to that perplexity. So in this language model, the words with similar meaning like nominal and verbal will be kept as one perplexity or
Actually, that's a pretty good reference. So this, yeah, it's very similar. If you think about it, the embedding vector of a word, if it's not close enough, like not clustered enough, then the model will be surprised. I don't know the exact distance it has to be for, like, I don't know the exact number, whatever, of like how far these points should be. But yeah, if they're on opposite sides, then yeah, that wouldn't, fit in the clustering.
yeah, it looks like a language based on the height of the words.
Well, I guess you could say that, yeah. Well, I also get asked this question quite frequently, but the feed-forward network, I realized I don't mention that, but simply put, fun fact, the encoder and decoder can have different amounts of layers depending on how much you want to analyze each of the input and output. Therefore, you're gonna have to start comparing matrices with different sizes, which isn't exactly ideal. So what the feed-forward network does is it has, well, yeah, you can search up the details later, but it basically transposes the matrix to like the same dimensions so they can actually be calculated in the multi-attention. That might be something useful to know. Right.
So for example, in ChatGPT,
Yeah.
where do you think the cosine similarities happen? Like, so for example, you ask it a question.
Yeah.
You're going to convert the question into a number of vectors. And then so there is a vector search going to happen inside, right? So, and where do you think the cosine similarity will happen?
So it actually happens in multiple places, but so first, we use it a lot in embedding. It's to kind of make that embedding algorithm work, right? We want to have a way to measure how close these vectors are to each other and then kind of feed back to the neural network and say, oh, these words should be closer or further. It's used there. And it's also used like here and there to, I guess, when it's predicting words, for example, it wants to know words close to, where it projects. So that would be another place they would use it. So yeah, they use it here and there.
So do you think that neighboring words actually make a difference by vectorizing a word in a sentence?
Neighboring words.
Like for example, there's a sentence and then we look at a particular word. And then while vectorizing it, does it actually look into the word after it and before it?
Yeah, so basically how it kind of predicts is it kind of looks at the vector, right, that you already have, and then it kind of almost like projects another vector. And it's like, what vector is closest to this other one? Kind of like that. So, and obviously it does this all through all these random mathematical calculations, but yes, that is kind of how it works. Yeah. So basically, essentially in English, you'll be looking at the rest of the sentence, right? Because you're already looking at the previous vector. And then you're kind of predicting a new one, which would come in the form of predicting another vector. Yeah. Well, I mean, if no one has any questions, I guess I had one more slide prepared. Maybe it's two. I forgot. But, the question is, how do you apply this to not just bioinformatics, but other fields other than natural language processing, which I know was briefly touched on in the beginning. But you need to consider aspects like, what do you want the value vector to be, or the query or key vector? Or, actually the more important question might be, what can you vectorize? And, people for a long time thought there's no way we could turn words like the thing I'm speaking right now into numbers, but we did. So that kind of shows that there's a lot of possibilities that we might not consider right now, which actually means that we could probably be using transformers for an even larger variety of things than we originally thought, as long as we struggle enough. And there's other considerations such as what is the metric? For natural language processing, we can use things like perplexity, or there's like a bunch of other things. But, depending on what type of field or what type of data you're trying to predict or analyze, you might not want to predict how close these words are to each other. That might not be the best idea, right? If you're doing something mathy, and then you suddenly start asking, oh, how close are these words to each other? That it doesn't really make sense. So that's another one. And I guess the last thing is, you know, basically you just kind of have to think, what sort of vector can I input and what sort of vector can I output, and would that be useful? That's all there is. So I'm now leaving this open to more questions. Also, if you have more questions, you can always contact me, or I would recommend using ChatGPT because it probably knows itself the best. That's slightly sarcastic, by the way, because I don't know, actually, I've never actually tried too much, but it does do a good job for basic knowledge, or just use Google, right? And here's the original archive paper, might be useful. It's called Attention is All You Need, in case you don't want to actually take a photo. So yeah, Attention is All You Need, Google paper 2017. And here's some articles I recommend if you want some more in-depth sort of explanation. So this QR code leads to a shorter article, and it's pretty effective, I would say, but it doesn't cover as much as this visual right over here, which the visual. So basically, this second article covers everything more visually. So, and if anyone's a visual learner, it might be actually more helpful. And it's also much longer. So I don't know if anyone wants to put time commitment into that, especially because I think everyone's here. It's like somewhere around midterms. So yeah, but yeah, so that's it. If anyone has any questions, again, email. Yeah.
Great. Yeah, thank you.